Okay, in the interest of time, let's get kicked off here. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this session in a series that we've been doing that is available up on our YouTube site, Metric Insights channel. I'm Mike Smitherman. I look after sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights. Once again, I've got Marius Moscovici on with me. Hi, Marius.
Hi, Mike.
So today we're going to be talking about metadata and specifically data catalogs and effectively how we can better get value out of a lot of work that's going on in a lot of companies around data governance and implementations of data catalogs and how we can bring that more to the so we're going to be focusing on that topic today. As usual, we will be recording this session, so we'll send out a recording afterwards. If anyone wants the actual slides and material that we're showing here, feel free to pop your name into the chat window down the bottom, and we'll follow up with a copy of those afterwards. Happy to share that. Um, Final thing is, happy to answer questions. Obviously, big group here, so lines are muted, but feel free to put questions into the Q&A window or the chat window, and we'll get to those at the end. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marius to kick things off, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everyone. So today we thought, since we're just 2 weeks away from Halloween, that perhaps a little bit of a horror story is in order. So I'm going to share with you a metadata management, data cataloging horror story that unfortunately plays out in many different organizations. Many times over and over. But fear not, or spoiler alert, I guess. This is a masterclass after all, so this is going to have a happy ending, and that we're going to work with you to show you what are the things that you need to do to write your own narrative, because we're all writing our own stories. And so, how do you make sure that your story is not a horror story and that it has a happy ending, right? So that's the focus that we're going to have in today's masterclass. So, um, much like sort of I guess it's almost a horror story trope, right? Every horror story starts with a sense of normalcy, where you're just going about trying to do something that seems perfectly natural and normal, and then it goes terribly wrong. And this story unfolds in exactly the same way, and it starts with kind of, you're going towards a data catalog, you're building the data catalog, and your initial step is just, go select a tool. So, somebody in the organization, somebody in management, or somebody from the data governance team says, hey, we really need a data catalog. It's going to help us. It's going to make sure that analysts can find the right data assets to build their reports. It's going to help our users. Our business users are going to be able to go in there and be able to see definitions of key glossary terms, enterprise KPIs, things of that nature. It's going to help them identify where PII data is so that they properly use information. It just seems like a really good idea and an essential component from a governance perspective. So you go off, you do a bake-off. Maybe you look at Calibra, Relation, Atlan. If you're in the Fabric ecosystem, perhaps you're looking at Purview, and then you select and implement a data catalog right after you do that. So that's a typical first step, and then you kind of continue on and you turn that thing on, and it collects massive amounts of metadata, right? It goes out there and looks at your entire ecosystem, brings in all the tables, all their definitions, automatically flags uh, PII data. You might go, perhaps you go in there and you supplement that information. Maybe you add descriptions if they're not already there. A lot of work goes to kind of just build up a huge metadata repository, and then for the business users, often you go in and you kind of define some set of enterprise KPI, some set of glossary terms. Those things sometimes are imported from elsewhere, sometimes they're created manually. But you build out a whole set of KPIs, and the definitions and other key terms that are there for your users. So this is all great. You've got this wealth of information inside of your data catalog, and then you roll it out. You have a big party, roll out, do demos, promote it. um, get lots of excitement from people congratulating you. Management congratulates you on a project well done, and you know, but sadly, this is where the happy part of the story ends, right? Because once you roll it out, well, some bad things start to happen. In that, you realize that you're starting 3 months, 6 months in, you go in and you find that actually, instead of building this destination site where everybody is dying to come in there, you've built a graveyard, right? And that nobody goes to visit it, right? Safe. If you look at your usage, maybe 3 or 6 months in, you find that, well, just like any graveyard, maybe there's the odd family members that come in to visit their deceased, and in this case, it'd probably be the data governance team or the folks that have been defining glossary terms might come in and make changes or add something or whatever. But widely, the business community is not using it, and the nor is the really analyst community. Most analysts are not coming in there and using the tool, right? So instead of, to your horror, right, you realize that instead of building this amazing repository that people are relying on and using every day and is generating a lot of value for the enterprise, you've actually built a data graveyard. You've metadata graveyard. You've taken your metadata and you've buried it someplace where nobody is actually going to see it. And that's obviously very tragic. Oftentimes it can negatively impact your career if you're involved in those initiatives. And then in the organization, sort of people move on. They'll go do something else, and then sometime after that, there's someone else sort of takes over, or there's a reorg or something kind of realignment around the data governance team. Somebody looks at it and goes, "Oh, geez, this is not work. What should we do about it?" And then one of three actions is taken, right? Usually in the story, like one of three sort of next steps naturally happen. Either somebody looks at it, usually somebody not involved in the original project, and says, "Oh, geez, our UI for this data catalog is just not easy enough to use. It's just too hard to use this UI. We pick Calibra, and really that's I'm not picking on Calibra, but as an example, we picked Calibra, and I think that UI is too hard to use. And there's this other tool out here, and this other tool that I saw at a trade show is much better. And so let's go ahead and see if we can maybe do better by realigning and moving on things. So you move from one tool to another, and that invariably doesn't actually make a difference because it's not addressing the root cause. Or you say, well, the reason it's not working is that we just don't have enough context in here, right? We need business users to come in or not even business users, maybe more like analysts to come in and define the data products more effectively. We need them to come in and identify what's good and what's not, and really enrich this. And so let's do a big outreach and ask people to come in and create and self-service and build these areas out. And that doesn't work because everyone's really busy, and you find that in the organization it's really hard to get people to do a whole lot of work to define these sort of clusters of content around data products and try to increase the utilization, right? Or the third sort of very common thing that people try that doesn't work is they'll say, okay, let's go ask management for more support, right? Let's mandate this. Every analyst should come in here and use this before they go build a report. That should just be a mandatory thing. And that doesn't work either because, yeah, sure, management can issue a directive, but invariably you find that people don't use it. And I can just tell you, I was talking to one of our customers a few months ago, and they were telling me that they've gone through this process 4 times. Right? 4 separate times they've done a reset. They've either picked a new tool or they've sort of just thrown away what was created and recreated the things in the tool. And each time it's sort of ended up in the same place, right? So the fundamental question, the thing that I think we need to kind of understand before we can identify how to do this properly, is to understand sort of why these data catalogs are turning into graveyards or ghost towns, why they're not becoming these hubs of huge activity where everybody just wants to come in there and use the information. And instead just these desolate spaces where everyone avoids it, save for a few, right? And that, if we can kind of understand the root causes of the issue, then we can really understand also what needs to be done to achieve a completely different outcome, so that we're not resetting these projects that have been unsuccessful, but just having yet another failure with a slightly different mode. So let's dig into that, right? So what are the primary reasons why really these don't work, why the data catalogs fundamentally generally don't get large adoption? First of all, I think we want to recognize that these tools, by their nature, are overwhelming to use for business users, right? I don't care if you pick Calibra or Elation or Outline or any of those tools, right? Or Purview, you're looking at an interface that is just has a lot of information in it. A typical business user, it's coming in to just trying to understand something about a particular report or what data they're looking at. It's just way too much information, and it presented at them, coming at them, and it just feels overwhelming. And often, if you were kind of like look at it, do any kind of usability testing, you discover that they just don't want to use these tools, right? And they'll tell you that certainly with their actions when you deploy these. So that's the first problem. Second problem is that fundamentally, these data catalogs have a very low signal to noise ratio. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you were listening to me on this webinar and there was a whole lot of static in the background, right? I had a terrible internet connection or very noisy. After a while, you would just not want to listen. You would stop, right? And the same thing is happening here, is that you've got this situation where you've collected all this metadata for all these tables, all these reports, but only a subset of the things in there are actually useful for the user. So if you're, if I come in, and so if I come in a data catalog as an analyst and I'm looking, I type in, let me look, find what I want for sales. What do we have on sales? I want to build a sales report. And I get 1,000 responses with all the tables and key definitions and things. And that's a really bad signal to noise ratio, because what I really want is what are the sales schemas that I should be using, the things that are really high value, right? I don't really want to see the rest of the stuff. I don't want to be bothered by that. If I'm a business user, I'm looking for a report. I want the report that really has high value for me. I don't want 30 different reports that are obsolete or duplicative that I'm seeing as part of that process, right? So that property of cataloging everything inherently generates a very poor signal to noise ratio, which is a blocker. And then most importantly, the act of going into a data catalog is fundamentally disconnected from the user workflows, from both the business user and the analyst. Business user is just consuming the report. The analyst is building a report. There isn't really a flow there where they're just like thinking as part of that flow, oh, let me go look in the data catalog for something. And that, because it's not part of their regular workflows, it just doesn't get used. So what's the resurrection strategy? How do you turn this ghost town or the graveyard into something else, into something that is a bustling place, into a place where people are going to be coming and using this metadata every single day, right? So to think about that, we've got to look at a few different things. First of all, fundamentally, we've got to understand this key premise that you cannot bring users to the metadata, right? That just does not work. That's sort of a key pivotal assumption that everyone thinks about. You cannot bring users to the metadata. You have to bring the relevant metadata to your users. So this is probably one of the most pivotal thing. You got to think about how your users are interacting with our content today and make sure that as part of their regular journey, they're consuming the metadata. It's just there, right? It's ubiquitous. It's pervasive. It's everywhere that they are. The second principle that we have to use in order to make sure things work is you have to understand that one size does fit none. In other words, you have different constituencies here, and each of them has very different needs. So the solution that we craft has to be tailored to the constituency and what they need. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about, let's say, these two roles, let's start with a BI analyst. Right? What does the BI analyst want from a data from the metadata that you have in your data governance tool? They want to be able to answer simple questions like, is there an existing report that I can use for my analysis? Right? So I am out there, I'm going to go build a new report, a new sales report, or a new marketing report, or whatever it is. Does something already exist that someone else created, whether I have access to it or not? Does something already exist that I can use as a starting point? Right? That's the most important thing, because I don't want to recreate the wheel. Right? And so that's what I care about. And then if there isn't anything, if I find that, well, that I'm actually building something completely new, then my question is, well, what are the data assets that already exist that I can use for my analysis? And I don't want to see everything we have on a topic. I want to see the really meaningful stuff, the things that are relevant, that are certified, that I know I can use in a productive way. So I'm not building a report off of a set of tables that are obsolete. Right? Now, this is very different from what a different persona, your business user, is looking for out of this, because the business user doesn't care about any of those things. What they want is, they want to, first and foremost, understand the report that they're looking at. So if I'm a business user, I'm looking at this, I see a sales report. What do we mean by sales? Does this include channel or not? Is this how is it measured? How is it calculated? Right? Those are the things that I care about. I also want to understand how I should best use the data in the report. Does this contain PII data? In that case, like, maybe I need to be really careful and I can't really share this. Is this privileged information that I can't even share with the rest of the team? Are there, does it have, are there certified, is it based on certified data sets? What are the things that I need to know to be able to understand how I should best use the data, right? To be able to answer my question. And then if the report is useful to me and I'm interested and I want to explore further, I want to understand, what are the other reports that share the KPIs in this report, right? What are the other sales reports where sales is defined the same way, so I can kind of like, drill along different dimensions and do my further analysis and know that the key enterprise KPIs that are inside this report are shared across all those other reports, so that I'm not comparing apples and oranges when I'm looking at my analysis. So looking at that, like, what are the things that we need to do to execute on that, right? To make sure that we're creating something that is tailored to the right audience, that brings metadata to them. Well, first of all, we've got to fix the signal to noise ratio, right? And make sure that there's a lot more signal and a lot less noise. What does that mean? Well, we want to expose only the content that is certified to search. So when I'm looking for things, don't show me a bunch of junk. Show me just the things that are good, that have been certified by somebody to be authoritative, right? Based on who I am, the audience that I have, show me only the attributes that are relevant to me, right? So if I'm a business user, I probably don't care about 90% of the information that's in the data catalog, nor should I, right? There's lots of technical metadata, lots of things that I don't care about. So just give me the things that are really relevant. And then let me drill down to the data catalog for additional information. So if I am that analyst that now wants to go all in and figure out what is that other 90% of content and get onto all the technical metadata, get into all the deep lineage analysis, etc., well, great, I should be able to do that. Right? So make it possible to get to the details, but don't force all those details on me and overwhelm me. Secondly, everything has to be as automated as possible. So you will absolutely fail if your expectation is for business users and even for analysts to come into a data cataloging tools and manually add a whole bunch of information. And then, that generally does not work, because it's just too much effort. If you way too many clicks to find the thing that I need to get to, and then to add it, and it's confusing interface, etc. So you want to make sure that you've got as much automation in place as possible. You want to import, for example, you want to import your metadata from catalogs that you have into your consumption layer layer for reporting. And then you want to associate key attributes to reports based on lineage, right? So if I'm using a report, I want to know if it contains PI data. I shouldn't have to go drill down and go into the metadata catalog and then a data catalog to try to find out, what are the tables it uses, follow the lineage. No, none of that should happen. That I should know immediately at the time that I'm looking at my report, that it actually contains metadata, PI data, because it's using a table that's been flagged in the catalog through the regular automation process as containing PI data, right? So it should just be a seamless thing where nobody has to do anything manually to make that happen. And then make sure that those glossary definitions and terms, they don't sit somewhere off to the side. Bring them into the experience. So if I'm looking at a report and I see an enterprise KPI and I want to know how it's defined, it should be right there at my fingertips, right? And it should be automated. It shouldn't require me to build that into the report as the report author. Let me specify what all the KPIs are that there. It should just come in by virtue of the fact that the KPI is associated with the table, and then the report uses that table, and therefore we know that the report uses that KPI. So that automated creation of linkage based on things that we've collected, things that we've enriched in the metadata, all the way to the report consumption layer is absolutely key. Next, you're going to have a curation, right? Like that's generally going to be the case. In most cases, yes, you've got automation. Hopefully your automation has gone as far as possible. And now there's kind of a little bit more that you've got to do. Maybe there's some things only your business users or your analysts know that they've got to add as metadata for report consumption, etc. You make that process as easy, as simple as possible. Have it be a simple workflow that's appropriate for the content that you're looking at, that doesn't have too many steps, but has enough steps. And then make it easy for people to just, with a few clicks, add the metadata that they need, have processes by which they're reminded if they haven't done it, gamify that whole thing. We have a whole webinar about that, about how to ensure metadata gamification if you're interested in, as part of the series of masterclasses. One of the episodes was about that. If you go back and listen to that, there's a lot of topics there. But make that process easy, fun, make it engaging, right? So that's very important as well. And then finally, make sure that the metadata is intimately connected to the flow of work that both the analyst and the business users are engaged in. So that metadata needs to show up when you're searching. If I'm searching for content, I should look at a report. I should know all the relevant metadata right there, right? When I'm doing my search, I should be able to search on that metadata, in fact, and find all the reports that have that metadata attribute. When I'm viewing the report, if I'm a business user looking at a report, that metadata should be right there, should be surrounding it, so that I can one click away find out what are all the enterprise KPIs that use this report. How is this defined, right? It needs to be intimately woven into that experience. And then increasingly now, as we're deploying agents on top of these systems and people asking questions, make sure that those agents also allow you to surface that metadata, right? So that if I have a question about, oh, gee, how is sales defined? What is enterprise sales? What is anything? Like, give me that information directly through the AI interface as well. So putting these pieces together, we can really achieve a completely different outcome where all this metadata is heavily used by your users. So for the rest of the webinar, we're gonna have Mike show you what does this look like. We'll show you some examples so you can kind of visualize these things in action.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So let me share my screen here and jump across to the demo. 1 second. Okay, so let's talk through some of those areas in the last few slides that Marius was touching on. Going to take you through sort of examples of how those things are set up in our environment and kind of what the result is for users accessing this stuff. So for the sake of the demo, our data catalog today is Elation, but really the concept goes with any of the data catalogs that Marius was talking about, so Calibra, Atlan, Purview, whatever, Informatica, whatever it is you might be using, the general concepts are the same. And from a BI tool perspective, we're going to be looking at Tableau and Power BI, but again, the concepts are the same against the different reporting platforms that you might be using. So what have we got set up here? Well, typically within something like Elation, what are you doing? You're connecting it to often your warehouse, wherever that may be, or warehouses where your underlying data structures are stored. And you're starting to capture, as Marius alluded to, metadata around the underlying tables and data that you have in your warehouse. So in our example, we're connected to a MySQL database. We've got a bunch of schemas within there. For the sake of this one, we're looking at our retail schema, which has, a typical set of tables, fact and dimension tables around what we're storing. And what typically happens, as I'm sure you all know, is that for each of the tables that you have within here, you start to categorize and tag and describe what is going on with the data in these tables. So a simple example, I have sales data sitting in a fact sales table here, and we've started to, flesh it out with some simple descriptive custom fields associated with this data. So the two I'm going to be looking at within this demo environment is we have a simple refresh frequency field. So how often is the data getting updated within this table? In this case, it's daily data, and a data classification field. So Marius mentioned PII data. We're simply marking these tables as whether they contain, confidential information, restricted, is it internal to the business, is it publicly facing information. So, yeah, very simple examples, but you get the concept that typically what's happening is we're going in at the table level, at the view level, where we're adding descriptions, we're adding tags, we're adding custom fields to basically govern the data that exists within the warehouse. So, once we've gone through that effort, as we've been describing, the challenge is unless I know, either as an analyst, which of these tables I should be focusing on, and then drilling down and finding the associated metadata, or if I'm a business user, having to understand what tables my reports are based on, so that I can see the details that might be interesting to me from these fields. It becomes this challenge to actually make this information useful. So, what are we striving towards? Well, anyone who's been on this series in the previous sessions will know that the concept behind Metric Insights is to provide a governed space for BI and analytics in the organization, where people have one place to come and find and access analytics in an area where they know the content is QA'd, is certified, and that has the necessary context around it that will help me as I look at the different reports that I might be interested in. We're looking at the BI catalog here. You may have seen this in the past again, where each of these tiles is basically an asset, a report, a dashboard, a data set, a file that has been published into the catalog from a particular source. So you'll see I've got stuff coming from Power BI, Tableau, SharePoint. I've got data sets that exist in SQL again. And these are assets that have been chosen to be published into this centralized space. Now, let's drill into a few of these now and talk about the concept of the metadata. So, you know, any tile that gets published, what are we trying to achieve? Well, if I click on this Tableau tile here and get a preview of this particular asset, um, we want to go beyond just providing a name and description like we have here that we'll pick up typically from the BI tool itself. In this case, Tableau. We also pick up an image of what it looks like, which is useful. But we want to start to bring in some of that additional metadata that we've been talking about. Now, some of that may come from a process that I'll show you shortly that is sort of manually capturing that information. But what we want to make sure is that any data any metadata that gets set within the data catalog, in this case, Elation that we were just looking at, gets propagated through to the report itself. So what you're looking at here is this monthly sales report, a preview in Tableau, but and we'll look at how we do this, but we're able to say, okay, what table or tables is this report based on? And have any useful and relevant metadata fields been set there that we want to make available to the end users? And in this case, we've chosen our two fields around the fact that this report does contain confidential information, and therefore that dictates how, as a user, I should be, treating this data in this report. And it also gives me an indication of how often it's updating, in this case, daily information. Um, If I drill into this, we want that metadata to persist as I navigate around the live report. So in Metric Insights, we embed now the Tableau dashboard that we are just looking at. It's done a single sign-on. I'm accessing this live report now in the Metric Insights catalog and portal. But always I have access to the metadata that we were just talking about that reminds me the context and how I should be using the information that I'm looking at here. Um, we'll also talk a little bit about around glossary terms. So glossaries are typically something that can be, you can set up glossaries within Metric Insights, but typically they may be set up within the data catalog as well, or in another source. And we want to be able to bring that to the point of consumption as well. So as Marius said, I understand that this report contains certain metrics, and if I click on those, I can see definitions of what those metrics are, how they're calculated, who owns potentially those definitions and those calculations. And then importantly, what other reports and dashboards certified within this catalog contain those similar metrics or those same metrics so that I can go out and continue my analysis knowing that what I'm looking at is consistent across the different reports and dashboards that I'm viewing. So what we're talking about here is bringing the metadata that we're setting within the catalog to the point of consumption of a particular report or dashboard that in this case is being accessed through the Metric Insights catalog. Now, we want to make sure again that that is available at all areas that a user might be interacting with. So in Metric Insights, we have the concept of search, obviously, excuse me, which is searching across the library of assets that we've brought into the Metric Insights catalog. So if I go and search for something like sales, it's searching across all the different tools and technologies and data sets that we're connected to bring back a ranked set of results around that term. But it also lets me search across the metadata fields that we're bringing in from our data catalog as well. So I've been able to, if I search for sales, it's bringing me back a set of results. If I then say, okay, just bring me back sales reports that contain confidential information or that are being updated or are updating on a daily frequency, show me those reports as well. So being able to search through the metadata that is potentially coming from a third-party source as well. Marius mentioned chatbots as well. We have, if you go back in the series and again look at past sessions that we did in the series on our YouTube channel, we did one around AI and chatbots and integrating those into a governed space as well. So similarly, as we pull in this metadata, we want to make sure that we are utilizing that in things like search, what sales reports do we have brings me back a list of results, but being able to drill into that, do any of these contain confidential information? Again, using the metadata that we pulled in from the data catalog as part of this. So this is kind of the end result that we're striving towards, is that we're taking the information that we're gathering in the governance process at the data level and being able to, cherry pick and choose what is going to be useful at the point of consumption to business users or analysts as they search through this content, and making that available to them so that we're leveraging that work that's going on in the catalog itself. So let's talk a little bit about how this happens and kind of the mechanics of what's going on here. Um, so it starts for us with having a connection into the data catalog itself, obviously. So these catalogs all have APIs that we can connect to. You want to be able to link into those APIs and start to pull that metadata out of the catalog so that we can use it to do some of the things that we were just looking at. So in this case, in this example, I'm connected into Elation. We're authenticating against the API for Elation, and that now allows us to start effectively pulling out that metadata that we were looking at. So this is what we call a data set within Metric Insights that's being populated with the metadata that we're interested in from the data catalog, in this case Elation. And what's important is it's not necessarily all the metadata. In this case, we're focusing on fact tables that we're interested in, and we're focusing on those two key fields that we've set within the catalog that we know are going to be interesting to, in this case, our business users or analysts who are searching or accessing reports within the Metric Insights catalog. So we've pulled that information in, so it's available now for us to work with. Excuse me one second. And we're going to now start using that in the concept of what we call custom fields within Metric Insights. So these are the fields that we set up that you saw within the tile or within the report on that initial screen. So if I go back here, these are, when I refer to custom fields, these are the fields that you see down here: data classification, refresh frequency. We start by setting those up as sort of template fields within Metric Insights. So if I pick something like the data classification field, it has description associated with it. It has values that we know can be populated within there. It has a scope associated with it. So, who do we want to make these custom fields, these field values, metadata fields available to within the catalog as you're looking around? So there may be certain types of fields like this one, where data classification is important to every type of user within the organization. There may be some fields that are more relevant to your, say, analyst community as they're building new content that will just muddy the water for business users. So we just want to show them to the analyst community. But effectively, we go and we set up sort of these template fields that we want to ultimately populate with the information that is available within the catalog. We then set up this idea of what we refer to as metadata propagation. And what this is effectively doing, if we sort of abstract it here, is what we want to be able to say is, look at all the reports that we've put into the Metric Insights portal and understand what tables those reports are based on, and then look into the data catalog information and say, okay, if a report is based on a table that has some metadata set for those two fields that we've been referring to, let's propagate that to the report and populate the custom fields that we were just looking at. So again, the end result being that, as we were looking at before, they get populated with the appropriate values that we saw in the preview and the fields there. So what this is doing, a high level, not going through too much details here, we want to say, okay, we want to look for tables. We want to associate those tables to reports based on the report lineage that we pick up. And then we want to map the values from the data classification and the refresh frequency fields within the data catalog to our custom fields within Metric Insights. So what is that doing? Well, this is showing, I've got two browser windows open here, but this is showing, the data coming from the data catalog for each of our fact tables. If we go back to our monthly sales summary report, one thing that we pick up that we didn't look at before is the lineage for this report. So this report, monthly sales within Tableau, is built on a number of tables from our warehouse, one of which is fact sales. Fact sales contains confidential and daily information. Therefore, we're able to propagate that to the report itself and make sure it shows up within here. Um, One other thing we can do that's useful is, and I think Marius alluded to this in his slides, is provide a link back as well to the catalog information. So whether this is for the analyst or the business users, you can determine what's useful to who. But again, if we go to our full screen here, if the details in the data catalog beyond just these two fields might be useful, then let's provide a link to that at the point of consumption. I can get back to the catalog table within Elation in this case and see everything associated there. So metadata propagation of custom field information is possible. And then the other thing is the glossary terms that we were looking at, so the metric definitions and calculations. This is something that can be set up within Metric Insights. You can have a metric term in this case, or a glossary term, gross revenue, how it's calculated, descriptions, ownership of these terms. You can set this up in Metric Insights, but probably this is happening already elsewhere, either in the data catalog or somewhere else. And so we can set up a synchronization process similar to sort of metadata propagation, which syncs the definitions that you have, brings those in, and associates them with the right reports and dashboards so that, again, when you're looking at them at the point of consumption, I can see what those definitions are and potentially which other reports contain that actual metric and that actual definition that might be useful to my analysis. Okay, the final thing I want to touch on is, and we've spoken about this a little bit in other sessions, but it's worth covering again for those that weren't on it, is the concept of publishing workflows and how the metadata concept comes into this as well. So even with propagation of metadata from the catalog itself and picking up metadata from the BI tools, names, descriptions, there's oftentimes additional metadata that isn't being captured anywhere that you want to set and make available to your end users. And you want to do that through a very structured process. We've touched on this in previous sessions, but that requires certain stakeholders to be responsible for adding that metadata to a particular report when it's published into the Metric Insights catalog. And we do that through this concept of workflows, where a workflow is a series of steps that a report has to go through. So when we plug into a tool, like Tableau, like we've been looking at, we recognize when new content gets created within Tableau, rather than just throwing it into the portal, we assign it to a queue, one of these workflows where it's passed through the various stages of testing and QA before it gets certified and published into a category within the catalog for end users to access. As part of this publishing process, we can enforce the requirement that a particular stakeholder, so in this case, it's going through a review with the developer or the analyst, it's going through a review with the business owner or business sponsor and our governance team before it gets published. Maybe as part of a particular stage, if I'm the business owner responsible for reviewing a particular report, let's say we want to tag this report with certain terms, but that's not available anywhere else right now. I can enforce that to happen at this stage within the publishing workflow. This user is now responsible for tagging the report before they pass it on to the governance team for their review. And so you can set manual curation of metadata terms assigned to the appropriate user so that when it gets published, you're ensuring it does get captured. So that's a quick sort of look at how some of the concepts that Marius was touching on can flood through in reality in terms of using the metadata that you're capturing within the catalog, making sure that you're leveraging what is obviously useful information, but at the point of consumption for business users and analysts through the concept of a catalog like we're looking at here. So with that, that kind of covers the content that we've been looking at today. If there's any sort of final questions on this or any final comments that you want to make, Marius, feel free to jump in. But let me just share the slide here again. So feel free to add any questions in the Q&A window if there are any. Um, as we're waiting on that, as Marius said, this has been part of a series that we've been doing around sort of governance, BI and AI governance, and making that effective within your organization. Uh, if you go to YouTube, the Metric Insights channel, there's recordings of all of these sessions that we've been doing. We have a couple more to go. The next one is going to be on the 5th of November, I think it is, where we're really going to focus on the governance of things beyond sort of your traditional BI and reporting layer to look at some of the AI and data science assets that are getting created within organizations, and we'll drill into that layer a little bit more. But with that, thank you for your time today. Thanks, Marius, for your time, and we look forward to seeing everyone on the next session.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all for joining. See you soon.